Good afternoon, Washington, D.C. Good afternoon. This is Tony Browder, welcoming you to another edition of the Browder File Show here on WPFW. So I had an opportunity this past weekend to attend Appeals Founders Day activities at the Thurgood Marshall Center and ran into someone who complimented me on my show and asked me for the name of the song that we play at my show. So I thought she was talking about Gregory Porter's Black Nile, but she was actually talking about my exit song, which is Earth, Wind, and Fire's. Gosh, and I'm blanking on the name of that song. Can you imagine that? All About Love, which is one of the last cuts on the B side of their 35-year-old album, That's the Way of the World. So I just want to make sure that you all are familiar with the music that we use to open and close the show. And I'm appreciative to everyone who listens. As I mentioned, this past Sunday, I attended the Appeals Founders Day fundraiser, and this was their 8th annual event. And that day is held close to the birthday of the founder of Appeal, Brother Lasana Mack, who, as Brother Bay would say, outran us and became an ancestor 11 years ago. You're going to hear a constant theme in our theme song as well as in our discussion today. Gregory Porter, in his song Black Nile, talks about the ancestors and history, the importance of history. And so we're going to be building on that theme, discussing it in various detail on today's show. I also want to give a special shout out to my daughter Atlantis because today is her birthday. And it's important to understand with regards to birthdays, with regards to our children specifically, that our children are the current incarnation of our ancestors. Brother James Smalls shared this concept with me years ago. And to my daughter, it's important that she understands that she carries the genes of her mother, her maternal and paternal grandmothers, who are ancestors, her brother Cedric, who's an ancestor, and many, many more ancestors, known and unknown. So that's who and what our children are. That's who we are. We are the latest incarnation of our ancestors. So the thing that we're going to be examining today is a look at ancestral intelligence. And we've got a guest today who's an expert on this subject matter. He's going to dissect this subject matter, talking about libation, talking about ritual, and the importance, the power, the value of ancestral land. And as I was preparing for this show and the themes that will be discussed throughout this show, I just happened to have received a text from someone yesterday with a Instagram clip. And this Instagram clip was a brief statement from Alice Walker. And I feel compelled to share it with you because it fits within our theme. It is what some people may refer to as a coincidence, but those who know me know that I don't believe in coincidences. And let me share with you what Alice Walker says in this clip. She says, we're walking on ground on this earth that's actually full of ancestors. We never pay attention to this fact, at least most people don't. It is as if all of this indigenous knowledge, all of the indigenous wisdom, all of the indigenous everything is something that we've simply discredited like it never existed. This is a deep impoverishment of us as modern people. That's why we walk around looking like zombies. She says, I know what it feels like to be supported by ancestors. I lean on them all the time. These are the people who got me as far as I am in life. So that's a profound and simple confirmation and endorsement of the subjects that we're going to be talking about today. And I'm sure you'll feel the same way at the end of today's show. My guest today is Kimani Nehusi. He currently teaches in the Department of Afrikology at Temple University. And his scholarship is distinguished by strong interest in the Afrocentric study of the African world from ancient times to modern times to the future. He not only explores African traditions on the continent, but he also examines those traditions in the Caribbean and his countryland of Guyana. He is a proud son of Guyana, and his scholarship, his intellect, follows in the tradition of some other noted sons of Guyana, such as George G.M. James, such as Walter Rodney, and our dear Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. So, welcome to the show, Brother Nehusi. How are you?
I'm pretty okay, thank you, Brother Tony, and thanks for having me on the show. A special hello to all our listeners and viewers also.
Well, thank you, brother. I'm pleased to have you here. I have been impressed with your work. You are a prolific writer. You are a deep thinker, and as I said, like the sons of Guyana who have influenced me, you are upholding this scholarly tradition quite well. Let me start by asking you to share with our audience the meaning of your name. Kimani Nehusi doesn't sound like a name that the average Guyanese resident has. So, what does that name mean, and what prompted you to take on that name?
Let's start with your second question first. What prompted me
Sure.
to take on the name? Because I'm moving from a context in which many colonized African people find ourselves. Um, our names are not African names.
Mhm.
They're European names. And although increasingly many African people are reclaiming that part of our identity, it's still instructive about what happened to me. I will not pronounce it, I will not um, validate it by pronouncing the specific European name that I have in mind that was inflicted upon me, not as a name, but as a badge of the worst kind of enslavement.
Okay.
This is the name of one of the most infamous thieves, mass murderers, rapists in the
Mm.
history of the world. And European people, in this specific instance, the medical doctor in my district, convinced my parents that one of their sons should be bearer of this uh, name in inverted commas. Now, let me say this that my parents loved me to the max. There's
Mhm.
absolutely no doubt that they wanted the best for all their children. But the fact that this medical doctor, European, could prevail upon them to inflict that badge of dishonor upon me shows the extent to which our people, never mind how willing, how dedicated to the cause they could be, were at some point in time ignorant, deliberately rendered ignorant about our history, about our culture, and so on. And it's important to understand this because if we don't know or we don't know enough about the things we're about to make decisions on, we may end up making a choice that is regrettable. And that's exactly what happened in my case. When my mother's eldest son was born, my father said, "No, we're not having that name. I have a name already." Then there were two girls. Then there was another brother. And my father said again, "No, I've got a name." When I came along, apparently he had no more defense. So I was inflicted with that name. And it led me into a consciousness or it was part of what led me into a consciousness that I was misnamed and dishonored in a tradition that did not belong to my people, but belonged to the people who oppressed us.
Hmm.
So I reclaimed and was helped to reclaim real African names. So my first name is Kimani. It's from among the Jukuyu people today in Kenya, and it means strong spirit or big spirit or faith. Nehusi is a corruption of the ancient Egyptian word for Africans from the interior of Kemet. So there you have it. But we could, for example, mine the word Kimani and come to Ka plus Imani, which have deeper resonances. You know, Ka is in Kemet, ancient Egypt,
Hmm.
and even before ancient Egypt, you find Ka. But I'll stop there.
Okay. Well, brother, I appreciate you sharing um, the evolution of your names. And as I said at the top of the show, I'm not one who believes in coincidences. And so I would suggest that that European physician who brought you into the world gave you a name that would prompt you to seek out your real identity. You know,
It was one of
sometimes
the things, definitely.
yeah, yeah. Sometimes things are placed on us that we may not understand or appreciate at the time, but they move us in the direction that we were headed from
Mhm.
before we were born. You know?
Yep.
Good,
Yep.
good, good. Well, look, let's get into it, man. I want to talk about um, two of your writings that
Mm,
really sit on my heart. Um, your publication from a few years ago, Libation, an African Ritual of Heritage in the Circle of Life.
mm.
And in the beginning of that book, you have a quote from the papyrus of Ani. I don't know if you remember that quote offhand, but if you remember it, can you share with our listeners why you chose that quote at the beginning of the book, and what is the significance of that quote from the papyrus of Ani?
I think the quote is pour libation for your mother
Yes.
and father who rest in the valley of the dead. For as you do for your parents, your children will do for you also. It's a very powerful quote that sets up the link between parents and children. And as usual in the African context of meaning, parent, father, mother don't mean only your immediate biological ancestor. So this opens up a whole discussion about ancestors of various kinds, not only our biological ancestors, but we must recognize that we also have political ancestors. For example, our sister Asata Shakur,
Yes.
who recently departed to the ancestral plane. We need to big her up. And I claim her as one of my ancestors, a political ancestor, who helped to shine light on the politics of this moment, on things that I myself lived through. And it is important for us to understand the notion of ancestor as being wider than just our immediate physical or biological ancestors, as well as beyond, more than our biological ancestors.
Well, we're going to get into that and especially explore your concept of the African ancestral land complex. That's a profound idea that I really want our listeners to just to just wear on their hearts, right? I really want them to wear that on their heart. But I want to spend a few more minutes talking about Ani. Ani was a 19th dynasty scribe. So we're talking about Kemet during the New Kingdom. And many people who have an interest in Kemet or ancient Egypt don't really understand how essential libation was to that ancient culture. Can you speak to why libation was important to our ancestors in Kemet and how far back that tradition goes?
Well, I would say that libation was tremendously important because it's a way of acknowledging all that is important or the greatest importance to people, and more directly the one or ones who are pouring libation, as well as those on whose behalf a particular libation is being poured. I think that the formula instructs us on this because usually a libation begins with the summoning and acknowledgement of the creator divinity, the highest God. And then there are the lesser divinities. Then there are political and other kinds of ancestors who've been elevated to the realm of divinity. Good example is Imhotep, who was such an influential, impactful individual that our ancestors in Kemet decided to make him a divine being, such a shining example of humanity. We could jump to Yoruba people and see Shango being given the same elevation. Among Rastafari today, Haile Selassie and Marcus Garvey are honored in similar ways. So for us, African people, we've always looked towards our divine, our greatest ancestors, and they're part of libation. We also look towards ancestors who've been most instrumental in various aspects of our lives, the so-called ancestors who are no longer among us, who are in some notions dead. So people mention our most famous people. They recall their spirits to be among us at that solemn moment. So that's another category of being. Africans also understood the environment as a sentient being, a living, breathing entity, interrelated entity. We were the first environmentalists in this world. I love to say that we were environmentalists before the environmentalists.
Mm-hmm.
So we salute the environment that we were always striving to keep clean, balanced. We also salute the unborn, those Africans who are waiting to return to this realm of existence. After we have summoned all of those spiritual forces, all the while pouring out liquid as we invoke them, we then come to the purpose for a specific gathering. And we therefore ask all of those assembled forces for their strength, their blessings, and whatsoever goodness they could give to the occasion that has caused the libation, that caused that assembly. So that's a way of enforcing and emphasizing all that's important to us. So libation begins with that kind of recognition.
Mm.
In terms of the antiquity of libation, and I do mean antiquity, it goes back beyond the time that we could recall. And I say that because in some of the oldest uh, formations, the oldest material evidence we have of African life, there is evidence of um, material things that suggest that these people were pouring libation and generally doing other kinds of offering of which libation was related. That brings me to the origin of libation and how old it is. It belonged to an integrated general ritual that involves not only libation, which is liquid offering, but you had blood offering or sacrifice. You also had censing, which is the offering of incense. There was at times offering of forest fruits, which is the best of the forest crop or the forest hunt and that kind of thing. And much later on, the word offering or prayers evolved out of this particular general ritual that was possessed by the people. And that ritual would later on evolve into more specific rituals that we know today as different kinds of offering, drink offering or libation, blood offering or sacrifice, word offering, prayers, force fruits, and so on.
Great. I want to let my guests know that you're listening to Dr. Kimani Nehusi, professor in the Department of Afrikology at Temple University. And we're going to be spending the rest of this hour talking about ancestral acknowledgement. I do appreciate how in your book, Libation, an African Ritual of Heritage in the Circle of Life, I do appreciate how you show the spread of libation throughout the entire continent. In your brief response about libation, you connected it with the Yoruba, and of course we have the Akan and Africans throughout the entire continent. So what you're suggesting is that African people as a whole have always had an understanding of their connection with ancestors or the dead or those who are no longer living, and that they also acknowledging them plays a role to facilitate the rebirth of those ancestors in those who are yet to be born. Is that the circle of life that you were referring to in the title of that book?
Yes, the circle of life is really the unbreakable bonds between those of us who are here, those who have been here, and those who will be here yet to come. And when those of us who recover our traditions, especially on this matter, understand that to be an unbreakable circle.
Mm-hmm.
Because for us, we are here, those of us who are here now, we are here physically and in other ways. But a human being is much more than our biology. We have spirit, we have soul, we have name, and many other aspects. In among our ancestors in Kemet, ancient Egypt, there were 9 different aspects of the person. And one of those was the name,
Mm-hmm. The Ren.
connection to our previous conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
name was very, very important. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And in Kemet, you would see almost a refrain to keep somebody's name alive.
Exactly.
If you pronounce the name of a person, you keep that person's name alive, and a person is their name.
Mm-hmm.
So you're keeping the spirit really of the person alive.
Yeah.
And this is another ancestral connection that happened. We're saturated with this. And
Exactly.
I'm saturated there in a very, very fine, beautiful sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's nothing to be rejected about it.
And just to um, add to that comment, I don't need to validate it because it is true, but just to add to that comment for those who are listening and don't really get it, I'm speaking to you from a radio station that broadcasts in Washington, D.C. Washington is named after 2 European ancestors, George Washington and Christopher Columbus. So the cities that we live in, the streets that we live on, the houses that we live in, the institutions that we support are named after ancestors for the very same reason that you indicated. When you speak the name of an ancestor, you give them power and you make it possible for their spirit to continue to live in your life, to continue to inspire or inspirit you. And that's what this process is all about. With regards to the title of your book, An African Ritual of Heritage in the Circle of Life, I'm reminded of Marimba Ani's first book. It was a little, almost pamphlet-like, written when she was Donna Richards, and it was called Let the Circle Be Unbroken. And so if we think of this concept of the circle of life and the obligation to let the circle be unbroken, then it means that the primary responsibility for maintaining our connection with the ancestors and those yet to be born is the living. We are the bridge that connects the past with the present and the future. So erase, if you destroy the bridge and erase our ability to understand the value of ancestors, or why it's so important to honor ancestors, and replace that with religions that demonize the concept of ancestorhood, then what you do is sever the link which connects us to our humanity, which connects us to our soul force. So with that being said, I want to do a deep dive into your 2024 article, Land and Identity in African Traditions, the origins of the ancestral African ancestral land complex. So, can you talk about this concept and then explain why the three elements that you referred in this article are so important to maintaining our spiritual continuity?
Thank you very much. The African Ancestral Land Complex is an associated or related set of behaviors, ritual behaviors that make land into ancestral land and maintain it as ancestral land. I'm going to say something about ancestral land just now as itself, the concept. But let me just say that the related practices are the ritual burial of the navel string or umbilical cord, the ritual burial of the placenta or afterbirth, and the ritual burial of dead bodies in the ground. Now, we could, in passing, note that these are ritual burials. They're not just burials, they're ritual burials because certain things are done to make certain that certain things are assured. And our ancestors understood very clearly that this is something that was of the greatest significance and importance. So, from the earliest times, when people begin to write down their concept of themselves, and this for us is in Kemet, ancient Egypt, the earliest in humanity, our ancestors in Kemet, the so called ordinary people, kept saying, I come from, and they would name a place. Sometimes they don't give you the name of the village, but they're pointing to a piece of ground. And they say, that's where I belong to. I come from there. And they also say, I know I'm a good person. And I'm a good person because I did certain things. I gave a boat to the boatless, food to the hungry, clothes to the naked, and so on. Now, these concepts will reappear later on in the Christian Bible at Luke and John, and of course, in the grand statement of who your neighbor is, Jesus and the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is an ultimate expression of being good, because your neighbor is anybody who needs your help, not just somebody who lives in close physical proximity to you. Now, all of this is founded upon our people's understanding of what goodness is. And goodness comes out of the ground. Goodness comes out of maintaining that ancestral ground in good order, the graves of your people, the memory that you come from that place, and that therefore you must have a certain attitude to that land. Now, our people have various words that they use to describe that land. It's not only ancestral land. In the Caribbean, you will hear generation land, and there are other things that come out, other nomenclature that come out of it. But what it really means is that people have entered into a process of continuously sanctifying a certain piece of land, and that therefore all of those who are invested in the land in that way are a family or a community. They have ties to each other that are unbreakable. and of course also to that land. So this is one way in which African people build families and communities and in their various expressions. You belong to that land. And in the Caribbean, at least, I don't know enough to be bullish about this in other parts of the African world. But even people who no longer remember that they're Africans in the Caribbean, you would hear them saying, my navel string is buried there, or an equivalent to that in various languages. And what that means is that they're making a declaration of irreversible ties to that piece of land. This to me is significant because the whole practice and the concept of ancestral land has survived from untold thousands of years ago in our people's social history to today, where it is kind of fractured. And it points towards not only the impossibility of really erasing us, our identity, but also the necessity for restoring our history, our culture, our rituals in these ways so that we restore ourselves because we understand why our ancestors evolved these ways of being. Let me just say that we know about the placenta, we know about the navel string, we know about dead bodies, about all of these being buried, but we never put them together.
Exactly.
We never put them together. So we've got to do that. We've got to show that in our practice, we were really articulating this concept of ancestral land. And to me, that's, putting ourselves back together, as you said, remembering ourselves,
Hmm.
putting various aspects of the self back together, but also what's going on in our minds, associating them again, recognizing them as belonging together. That's our task now.
I want to let my guests know that you're listening to Brother Kimani Nehusi here on the Browder File Show on WPFW. Let me remind you, or let me inform you, the listener, that on Tuesday, October the 7th, from 5 a.m. until midnight, WPFW presents special programming, What Breaks the Heart. They're going to be inviting millions of people around the world to mark the 2 years of genocide in Gaza. That will be done through interviews, through stories, music, and poetry. The day's programming will reflect the cultural and political concept of Palestinian Samud, highlighting the enduring presence, the resistance, and the connection of the Palestinian people to their land. That issue of land is coming up again. It's so important. So I want to encourage everyone to tune in to PFW specifically this Tuesday from 5 a.m. until midnight to listen to the special programming, What Breaks the Heart, commemorating 2 years of the genocide in Gaza. Brother Kamani, let me go back to something else you referenced in your article. We talked about remembering, but you also referenced 4 R's that are critical to African ancestral land concepts, and that is reassembling, relocating, reconnecting, and restoring, right? So all of these are ways of, I guess, bringing back into our consciousness aspects of our humanity that were made illegal during the process of enslavement and Jim Crow and all of these things that benefited our oppressors for us to not know so that we would not tap into the energy, the consciousness, the power, the traditions that will allow us to fight back and ultimately win. So your paper about restoring this ancestral African ancestral land concept is so critical to this restoration of our memory and the empowerment of African people. What are some other ways that you're familiar with in your hometown or your home country of Guyana that are direct carryovers from West Africa or East Africa or any other part of the continent?
Oh man, if you got a couple of years, we could go
Well,
into.
brother, I'm here. I'm here.
I
Talk
would
to me.
I would first of all say um, culture is a generality,
Okay.
and I'll go into more specifics just now because it seems important to put forward the concept of culture there because what we experience really is our oppressors trying to oppress and outlaw our culture and our people finding ways to fight back. But since culture is such a large concept, sometimes we don't put it all together.
Mhm.
So, to answer your question, one of the things I would talk about as an aspect of culture is language. I would also want to talk about stories that have been handed down to us, Anansi stories, for example.
Mhm.
I would want to talk about foods,
Yeah.
different ways of cooking and that kind of thing. I would want to talk about medicine. There is so much. But if you permit me, let's start with medicine, for example.
Okay.
You know, um, Anybody who grew up in the Caribbean before a certain point in time, maybe it still happens. I'm certain it happens still in certain places. But if you grew up in the Caribbean before a certain point in time, you would know that during the month of August, all the children in the community would be dosed off with purgative. Southern United States, you probably got it.
Yeah, in the South, yeah,
Of
I've heard of
course.
that. Hmm.
Now, today, in the United States medical industry, and I use industry in a very
Absolutely.
frowning way because it
Hmm.
is an industry,
Absolutely.
unfortunately,
Big business,
something
big
the
business.
mass,
Mhm.
yeah, big business, right? They call it colon cleanser, colon cleanser. Now, this is something that our ancestors handed down through uncounted generations. I'm absolutely certain about it. One of the researches I'm doing now concerns women in the Orly Nile Valley. And one of those women is known to most of us, although we don't realize that she has traveled from so far back. And I'm referring to the person you call the African midwife. Now,
Mm-hmm.
in southern United States, for example, and many other communities in the Americas and the Caribbean, you had the African midwife who delivered babies,
Hmm.
prenatal and postnatal care. Now, this person was also the person who was usually responsible for doing many other things. Here's something. Could you point me
She was
to
also known as the root woman.
right? There you go.
Yes,
There you
indeed.
go.
Hmm.
Yes, I've seen that word in the southern United States because she
Hmm.
was a herbalist,
Yes.
you know, and she was also a spiritualist.
Hmm.
And she
As a matter
wasn't
of fact, brother, we saw that character writ
Mhm.
large in Ryan Coogler's latest film, Sinners.
Okay,
Uh,
I've got to visit that.
oh yeah, no, you have to. You have to. She was Smoke or Stack's wife, who
Mhm.
made the that pouch that he wore that kept him safe during the
Okay,
war overseas and the war in Chicago. So that
right.
element was woven throughout the entire story. Yes.
Well, I'm glad that you're validating what I said just now because these things are there, they're powerful. And like I said before, we've got to look at them, understand them,
Mm-hmm.
talk about them, explain them,
Yep.
and relaunch them in the consciousness of our people. And
Revalidate and remember them. Yes, sir.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, you know, that medicine that we're talking about, it traveled from so far in Kemet and sometimes even before Kemet. And that's not the only aspect of medicine that connects us to our ancestry on the African continent. There are other things like how you deal with sprains and so on. It's all there. It,
Mm-hmm.
it's also the practice of medicine. I was telling somebody a day or two ago that at one time I thought I was a high jumper, you see. And when, when I took off, I slid and landed awkwardly on my arm. It was sprained. And they
Mm-hmm.
took me to the village practitioner, Cousin Doris. And instead of looking at the arm and starting the operation immediately, Cousin Doris said, "Ah, boy, I know you. How your mother? How is your father? He's still in the
Mm-hmm.
bush. How things going with your aunt?" And I'm there wanting to fret. Why doesn't she? But she was doing something that our people understood for thousands of years ago. If your mind isn't relaxed and receptive to whatever it is, that treatment is not going to be either effective or as effective as it should be. Now, our people understood that uncounted generations ago. It's only in recent times that European practice has recognized that the mental condition of a patient is significant for the healing process.
Absolutely.
Our people knew that, you know. So that's another aspect of medical practice that connects us or reconnects us to our ancestry. And the whole idea that the mind is important to healing and that the mind is important to equilibrium is also important for us as connecting to our ancestry.
Well, let me ask you something since you're talking about the mental connection to
Mm,
healing, the mental connection to maintaining spiritual equilibrium. Um, you made reference in the article to something called risk management strategy to
mhm,
minimize individualism and corruption and behaviors
mhm,
which allow for the introduction to negative thinking, which disrupts the healing process, disrupts the presence of a spiritual balance within the community. So
mhm.
the memory is an important part of that. What role do rituals play in cementing certain memory practices or memory conditions within the community?
That's an extremely important question. Ritual is a way of dramatizing the significance of whatsoever is being ritualized and of further imprinting or imprinting it in the memory of people. You see, if you attend a ritual and the ritual, let's say it's libation, you know that the pour whatever drink it is, could be water,
Hmm.
to whatever occasion it is, to this divinity, this creator God. Now, all of those are being lodged, emphasized in the mind of whosoever has witnessed that. So a ritual is a way of further encoding the importance of whatever you're dealing with in the minds of the people. And a ritual is usually um, short, powerful, dramatic, and all these are ways of further emphasizing and encoding whatever it is in the mind of the onlooker. And because of the community nature of a ritual also, it further says to whosoever is a participant, all of us who participate belong to each other because we've participated in this common ritual. This is another way also of ensuring connection with the ancestors. You don't have a ritual, or you hardly do, without the ancestral presence if you're in order as an African. So all of these things reinforce each other, reinforce African identity.
Hmm.
So to me, a ritual is one of the most important things you could have. It to imagine a person. or a group without ritual is really to not to give identity to those people. And the specific form that you recalled just now about making certain that, what's it, suffering from a mental block here, but
Hmm.
you said, what's it you told me? I want to latch on to the specific formulation you mentioned. Something I said.
When you may refer to a risk management
Yes,
strategy to
that's it.
minimize. Yes.
Yes,
Hmm.
the risk management strategy.
Hmm.
Now, this is not only for one generation.
Yes.
It's a strategy for all generations. And that's why it's so important to see it for what it is. By elevating this practice to the realm of divinity, our ancestors were saying, this is the most important thing. By making certain that they dramatize and emphasize the collective responsibility of the leaders on behalf of the community, they're saying this is so important, you cannot play around with it.
Hmm.
And the consequences of this, of disagreeing with, frowning upon, or even worse, individualism, corruption, greed, and other forms of negative behaviors, I think it's a winner, and African communities were able to maintain themselves for thousands of generations because of these and other arrangements that our people had. And sometimes we forget, or we do not remember or know that these rituals, when you put them together, maintained our people at the forefront of humanity for such a long period of time. And if we could
Absolutely.
count the single instance of Kemet, we see that for thousands of years, our people were there passing on information down through the generations. And this is the key. Every generation is the ancestor of all the succeeding generations. And our people passed on what they knew to each generation coming after, who passed it on to the next generation, and so on and so forth. It is that system of ancestral knowledge, of reaping the wisdom of those who have gone before, that
Mhm.
kept our people at the leading edge of humanity for the longest period that any group of people have been in the
Right.
forefront of humanity. And it's something that we must understand. And what this says to me is that the keys to our future, to a good future, lie in our past.
Right.
We
You know,
must go ahead.
no, I was going to say, thinking in terms of the power of ritual to maintain cultural continuity, we have continued some of these rituals in our lives now, but that the awareness of this cultural continuity has been broken. There are rituals that we engage in when we have a family gathering, a meal. We say prayers. We make sure that elders are seated in a certain place. There's rituals associated with practically every gathering of a people. And those rituals can be expressed through music, through clothing, through costume, through certain environments, creating an environment that is shaped by, you mentioned at the top of this interview, using incense, pouring libation, whether it's water or gin or some other alcoholic beverage. But all of these rituals are designed to achieve the same goal, and
Mhm,
that is to connect us with the unseen
mhm,
and empower us so that we can pass on these connections to the unborn.
mhm,
That's, those are powerful concepts, man. And I really want our listeners to allow them to sink in and take them seriously, and also to begin to consider um, the aspects of our lives that are ritualized, that we may not be aware that they are in fact rituals, and begin to search for the origins of those rituals within our families, particularly.
Mm-hmm. Well, two things there. Searching for them within our families is the specific,
Hmm.
and we need to do that. The
Hmm.
specific expression, my family did this, blah, blah, blah. But it's also important for us to apprehend the principles that are being articulated in each practice and where those principles come from and how they got to us. And to recognize them in the glare of public performance that is usual among us, but we don't recognize it.
Hmm.
And I want to mention, we talked about libation.
Right.
I want to mention a couple of things. Most of our listeners would be familiar with Tupac Shakur.
Sure.
Well, he's got a, a tune that's called Pour Out a Little Liquor.
Mm.
What is he talking about?
Okay.
He's talking about libation,
Yeah,
but he
absolutely.
doesn't use that word.
Hmm.
But it is libation he's talking about. Let's go to Naz, who says, just a moment of silence. And who is Naz talking about? Well, he's talking about his homies who are not there physically. They're
Hmm.
locked away in the man's jail, but they're there spiritually because they would have agreed with that occasion.
Hmm.
And Naz is demanding a moment of silence so that you could admit all of these spiritual presences to this performance, to this occasion of reverence to ancestors, spiritual brothers and sisters who were not physically there because they know that this is a good purpose. That's like
Right.
it.
And that's also the last scene in Cooley High, where the
Mhm,
brother goes to the graveside of his fallen comrade
mhm,
and cracks open a bottle of liquor and pours a
mhm.
little bit on the ground for the brothers who are not here.
Well,
Absolutely. Well,
but you
look,
see,
brother, look, our
mhm,
time is just about up, but I got a
what?
question that I need to put. Yeah, well, look, we only got an hour on the show. But look, I got a question for you
Mhm,
that came to me as I was reading your article.
mhm,
And we know several people, we have several friends who are from Guyana, right? And
mhm.
I asked one of them about this phrase, and they never heard of it. They didn't know what it meant. I want to ask you, what does the phrase Nowarian mean?
Oh, it means somebody who comes from nowhere. So you're not from any specific place. You're not rooted to the ground. You
Okay.
are from nowhere, therefore you're a nowherean.
Ah, got it. So you don't have any roots. You don't have a connection to African ancestral sacred land, right? Is that the
You have
concept?
no correct connection to ancestral land.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, okay.
That's you therefore you're less a person really because you don't come from a community that's
Mm-hmm.
rooted in the land somewhere or
Hmm.
the other. It's
Right.
one of the
It's
greatest
the
defects you could
you're the
have.
opposite of the concept of Ubuntu, which is a person is a person because there are people. So you have no people, you have no roots, you have no foundation. You're just there. Got
Right.
it, brother.
And
Got it.
remember that in Kemet, our ancestors identified the people they call the Amu as that kind of person who is not rooted in the land, and that therefore they're defective for that reason.
The Amnu. So those would be the foreigners,
Yes,
the
yes, the
outsiders.
so-called wretched Amu,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, the outsiders, the Eurasians.
The Eurasians. So in other words, it's knowing who you are, knowing yourself, but also knowing your ancestors and knowing the land that validates your humanity.
Yeah, but if you don't know your ancestors and know your land, you don't know yourself,
Yeah.
you know. And we need to be very clear about that. A lot of us jump up and beat our chest and say, I am somebody. No, you're not anybody if you don't know your ancestors.
I hear you. I hear you. Well, look, brother, I want to thank you so much for being on today, and we're definitely going to have you back because we've just scratched the surface of the many areas of African consciousness, African history and culture and traditions, values and rituals that we need to remember. And you're the person who will help restore these memories in our consciousness, brother. So I thank you so much for being on. Before I let you go, are you working on anything special now that we should keep an eye or an ear out for?
Yes, I mentioned it. I'm working on women and gender in the Orly Nile Valley. And women and gender really means human beings because you can't talk about women without talking about men. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a teaser out there. I'm looking at the Nebet pair, this so-called housewife, but she was really the leader of activities that unfolded in the place we call the house.
Okay.
And I'm talking about the rect or the knowledgeable woman who turns out to be the African midwife. And
Okay.
that African
Yep.
midwife travels through space and time with our people so that she ends up in the Caribbean, in the Americas, and elsewhere as herself,
Mm.
identifiable as herself. So that's one, those are some of the things.
Okay. So I want to let my listeners know you've been listening for this past hour with Professor Kimani Nehusi, who is a professor at Temple University. Brother, before you go, you have a short video about that illustrates this concept of African ancestral land. Can you
Yes.
give our listeners the link to that video or let them know how they can find that video?
Um, I will have to give it to you so that you could give it to them because I don't remember
Okay. Well,
the
no. Well, look. This is what I'm going to do. I'll share with our listeners next week. But I'm going to add it to the YouTube link for this show, so it will
okay.
be on the YouTube channel for everyone who wants to see this show at a later point. And it is a wonderful, short, animated feature that
Mhm.
wonderfully illustrates these concepts that we've been talking about today. So
Yes.
kudos for that, my brother.
Thank you very much. And just let me add that it's
Yes.
available in Spanish and French at the moment, and soon it will
Excellent.
be in Yoruba and other
Mm.
languages.
All
So,
right. Well, look, we're gonna have to have you back on to talk about that because media is my thing, and I
mm,
love the use of media to spread our culture. But brother Kamani Nehusi, I want to thank you so much. I've got to jump off. I've got 2 minutes before my show ends and the next show
mm,
begins. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. I want to remind you that next week we'll start the pledge drive. So my next two shows in October will be during the pledge drive, and I want all of you all who've been listening to the show, telling me how much you love the program, to call in and make your pledge. This is Tony Browder. I want you to stay tuned for
If
some
there
very
is
cool
no
coming up
beauty,
next. And remember, it's all about love, baby. It's all about love. So yeah, that was it. I ran a little over, so they cut me off early. So we're
mm,
still on, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to post today's show on the YouTube channel, and then I'll send you a link,
okay.
and then you can share the link with everyone. And I'll put the. As a matter of fact, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to add that animated piece to the show on YouTube so that they'll
Mhm.
see it automatically. But I'll also add the link so
Oh,
that they'll be able to share it with others. So this has
I'll
been
be
great, brother.
grateful.
All right,
And really, thanks for having me. You know, sometimes I don't even think about some of the most obvious things.
brother. That's okay. That's okay. We can't think of everything.
Yeah.
We can't think of everything, but that's why I'm going to have you back so we can talk about more things that you can forget.
Mhm.
So I'll have you
Yeah.
back on so we can talk about those things as well.
All
So
right.
this is wonderful, brother. I appreciate you
Mhm.
and appreciate your scholarship and your diligence to doing the work despite the opposition.
Well, that's what got me a bit rattled, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm recovering from a very bad dose of the flu also, you
Mm-hmm.
know. Yeah, it really hit me down
Okay.
2 weeks ago.
Okay. Well, stay hydrated. As you saw, I've been drinking, throughout this hour.
Oh
So
yeah,
I
I drink
encourage
a
you
lot
to
of
do the
water, man.
same.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, quite a lot of water.
Good,
Yeah.
good, good. Well, thank you so much, brother. I'll send you this link as soon
Mhm.
as it's posted,
Mhm.
and we'll be looking forward to getting you back on again in the very near future. All right.
Well, thanks for having me, and let's continue working together. I'm here. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, my brother. You
Take
take
care.
care. All
All
right.
right. Bye bye.
Peace. What's that?